Struwwelpeter. Struwwelpeter is a German children's book published in 1845 by Heinrich Hoffmann, a doctor who wrote it for his 3-year-old son after failing to find suitable books in Frankfurt bookstores. The book contains 10 illustrated cautionary tales showing extreme violent consequences for minor childhood misbehaviors, designed to frighten children into obedience. In The Dreadful Story of Pauline and the Matches, a girl who plays with matches burns to death, leaving only ashes and her shoes behind. In The Story of Little Suck-a-Thumb, a tailor bursts into the room with giant scissors and cuts off both of a boy's thumbs as punishment for thumb sucking. The Story of Augustus, who would not eat his soup, depicts a boy who refuses to eat soup and wastes away over 5 days until he dies on the 5th day. The illustrations are deliberately grotesque and exaggerated, showing children on fire, being mutilated, and dying in various horrifying ways. The book sold millions of copies worldwide and was translated into dozens of languages, becoming one of the most popular German children's books ever published. It represents Victorian-era philosophy of using fear to control children's behavior, and many modern psychologists consider it potentially traumatic, though it remains in print today despite ongoing controversy about its psychological impact on young readers. Hansel and Gretel is a German fairy tale collected by brothers Jacob and Wilhelm Grimm and published in 1812 in the first edition of their Children's and Household Tales, which contained 86 stories. Unlike sanitized modern versions, the original is brutally dark. The children's mother, not a stepmother, deliberately convinces their father to abandon them in the forest due to poverty and famine, a decision made twice when the children first find their way home. The witch who captures them explicitly plans to fatten and eat Hansel, keeping him caged while forcing Gretel into servitude. When the witch checks Hansel's finger to see if he's fat enough to eat, he tricks her by offering a bone instead. Gretel eventually pushes the witch into her own oven, and the tale describes her burning to death while Gretel and Hansel escape with the witch's treasure. When they return home, their mother has conveniently died, allowing a happy reunion with their father. Later editions changed the mother to a stepmother to soften parental abandonment, but the original reflects the Great Famine of 1315 to 1317, when desperate parents abandoned children and cannibalism was suspected. Most modern versions omit these darkest elements. Little Red Riding Hood. Little Red Riding Hood originated as a French fairy tale published by Charles Perrault in 1697 in his collection Histoires ou Contes du Temps Passé, far darker than modern adaptations. In Perrault's telling, the wolf tricks the girl into eating her grandmother's flesh and drinking her blood, explicitly describing this unwitting cannibalism. The wolf then instructs the girl to undress and get into bed with him, with clear sexual overtones serving as a warning about predatory men. The story ends with the wolf eating the girl. No woodcutter, no rescue, no happy ending, just death. Perrault included an explicit moral warning: children, especially attractive, well-bred young ladies, should never talk to strangers, for if they should do so, they may well provide dinner for a wolf. The wolf represents dangerous men with seductive intentions, making this a thinly veiled warning about rape and seduction. The brothers Grimm later sanitized the story in 1812 by adding a huntsman who rescues both grandmother and girl by cutting open the wolf's belly, completely transforming the tale into one with redemption. Most modern retellings follow the Grimm version or sanitize further, removing the cannibalism and downplaying sexual elements, though Perrault's original remains in print for those seeking the darker tale. The Juniper Tree. The Juniper Tree is a German fairy tale from the Brothers Grimm first edition, published in 1812, considered one of the darkest fairy tales ever written for children. In this story, a jealous stepmother murders her stepson by decapitating him with a heavy lid from an apple chest, causing his head to roll off. She then chops his body into pieces and cooks him into a stew, which the father unknowingly eats and enjoys, explicitly commenting that the meal tastes good and asking for more. The boy's half-sister collects his bones from the meal and buries them under a juniper tree in the garden, where he magically resurrects as a beautiful bird. The bird rewards his father and sister with gifts, but takes revenge on the stepmother by dropping a millstone on her head, crushing her to death. After her death, the bird transforms back into the boy, alive and whole. The tale is approximately 5,000 words long, making it one of the longest in the Grimm collection, and appears as story number 47. Unlike many fairy tales that were later sanitized, the juniper tree remained largely unchanged because it's less famous, though it deals explicitly with cannibalism within a family and includes graphic violence, resurrection, and revenge that remains shocking even by modern standards. The Little Mermaid. The Little Mermaid is a Danish fairy tale written by Hans Christian Andersen and published on April 7, 1837, vastly darker than Disney's 1989 adaptation. In the original story, the sea witch cuts out the mermaid's tongue with a sharp knife, taking her voice permanently. When the mermaid gains human legs, Andersen describes every step as feeling like treading upon the points of needles or sharp knives, meaning she experiences constant excruciating pain throughout her time on land. The prince never recognizes her sacrifice and marries another woman, leaving the mermaid heartbroken. Her sisters trade their hair to the sea witch for a dagger, giving the mermaid a choice: kill the prince and return to the sea as a mermaid, or die herself. Unable to murder the prince, despite his betrayal, she chooses death and dissolves into sea foam at dawn. In later editions, Andersen added a consolation where she becomes a daughter of the air, with a chance to earn an immortal soul through 300 years of good deeds, though this still isn't a happy ending. Andersen stated this was his personal favorite story, reportedly reflecting his own experiences with unrequited love, teaching children that sacrifice may go unrewarded and love doesn't always conquer all. The Adventures of Pinocchio. The Adventures of Pinocchio is an Italian children's novel by Carlo Collodi, serialized from 1881 to 1883 in the children's magazine Giornale per i Bambini, far more violent and dark than Disney's 1940 sanitized film. In the original tale, Pinocchio murders the talking cricket with a hammer for giving him unwanted advice, though the cricket later returns as a ghost to haunt him. Pinocchio's feet burn completely off in a fire while he sleeps, leaving him unable to walk. The fox and cat betray him, hang him from an oak tree with a noose, and leave him to die, with Collodi describing Pinocchio swinging from the branch in an actual hanging scene. The Blue Fairy first appears not as a kind godmother, but as a dead child, lying in a coffin. On Pleasure Island, Pinocchio witnesses his friend transformed into a donkey, sold to a circus, crippled, and then drowned when no longer useful. Collodi originally intended to end the story with Pinocchio dying as a puppet, hanged from the tree, but public outcry forced him to continue the serial with Pinocchio's rescue and eventual transformation into a real boy. The story includes extreme poverty, starvation, and exploitation as harsh moral lessons about obedience and consequences of misbehavior. The Giving Tree. The Giving Tree is an American children's picture book written and illustrated by Shel Silverstein, published in 1964 by Harper and Row, appearing simple but exploring disturbing themes of codependency and exploitation. The 64-page book tells the story of a tree that gives everything to a boy throughout his life, receiving nothing in return, with the repeated refrain, "and the tree was happy," appearing after each act of self-destruction. The boy takes the tree's apples to sell, then her branches to build a house, then her trunk to make a boat, progressively destroying the tree, while never expressing gratitude or love. The tree expresses happiness while being dismembered, suggesting either selfless parental love or a deeply unhealthy codependent relationship. The book ends with an elderly man sitting on the stump of the now dead tree, which has nothing left to give except a place to sit, and the tree is happy again. The book has sold over 10 million copies worldwide, but remains controversial banned from some libraries and schools for perceived messages about unhealthy relationships. Silverstein never explicitly stated his intended message, leaving interpretation open, with some reading it as beautiful selflessness, and others as a disturbing portrait of an abusive, one-sided relationship where one party gives everything and the other only takes, making it psychologically dark rather than physically violent like earlier fairy tales. Coraline. Coraline is a dark fantasy novella by British-American author Neil Gaiman, published in 2002 and marketed for children ages 8 to 12 despite genuinely frightening horror content. Gaiman began writing it in 1990 and finished it specifically for his daughter Holly, who was 5 years old when he started, stating he wanted to write something that frightened him. The approximately 30,000-word novella tells the story of a girl who discovers a parallel world where her other mother has black button eyes and wants to sew buttons permanently over Coraline's real eyes. The other mother has kidnapped other children's souls, trapping them as ghosts behind a mirror after sewing buttons over their eyes, and they died trapped in the other world. The other mother transforms into a skeletal spider-like creature with a hand made of needles for the final confrontation, representing pure body horror. The book won the Hugo Award, Nebula Award, and Bram Stoker Award, all prestigious honors. It was adapted into a 2009 stop-motion animated film by Henry Selick that maintained much of the horror. The book represents a modern trend in children's literature of not sanitizing genuine horror, treating children's intelligence seriously while exploring themes of parental neglect, identity theft, and the danger of getting everything you wish for, proving that contemporary children's books can be as dark as historical fairy tales. Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark. Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark is an American horror anthology series written by Alvin Schwartz and illustrated by Stephen Gammell, published in 3 volumes in 1981, 1984, and 1991, containing folklore-based stories for ages 8 to 12. The books include genuinely disturbing tales with graphic content. The Red Spot describes spider eggs hatching from a pimple on a girl's face, with dozens of baby spiders bursting out of her cheek. Harold features a living scarecrow that skins 2 teenagers who mistreated it. The Thing shows a woman's head falling off while her headless body pursues it. And The Dream describes a boy who repeatedly dreams his death and then dies exactly as he dreamed. Gammell's illustrations are notoriously nightmarish, using scratchy, distorted techniques to create grotesque images of pale, decomposing faces, empty eye sockets, and ambiguous, horrifying shapes that traumatized a generation of readers. The series became the most challenged children's book series in American libraries during the 1990s and 2000s, frequently banned for being deemed too scary for the target age group. Despite controversy, the books sold over 7 million copies, with educators defending them for promoting reading among reluctant readers. A 2019 film adaptation significantly toned down the content, and the books represent an ongoing debate about how much fear is appropriate in children's literature. The Rabbits. The Rabbits is an Australian picture book published in 1998 by Hachette Australia, with text by John Marsden and surrealist illustrations by Sean Tan, marketed for ages 5 to 12 despite addressing genocide and colonization. The book serves as an allegory for European colonization of Australia, with native rabbits representing indigenous Australians and strange new rabbits representing European colonizers, though this is never explicitly stated in the text. The story begins with native rabbits watching the arrival of rabbits in ships, who bring strange machines and gradually destroy the land through industry and development. The new rabbits force native rabbits from their homes, and many native rabbits die or disappear as disease spreads through their population. Tan's illustrations show an increasingly nightmarish industrial landscape with numbered rabbits, suggesting livestock tagging, barren wastelands, and smoke-filled skies. The book ends with a completely dark and empty page after asking, Who will save us from the rabbits? With no answer provided. It won the CBC Picture Book of the Year award and is used in Australian schools to teach colonization history. The book remains controversial for introducing young children to themes of genocide, environmental destruction, and cultural erasure, though educators defend it as an age-appropriate way to discuss difficult historical topics that shaped Australia's identity. Watership Down. Watership Down is a British novel by Richard Adams, published in 1972, telling the story of rabbits fleeing the destruction of their warren, marketed as a children's book despite containing graphic violence and heavy themes that sparked debate about its appropriate audience. The 478-page novel was initially rejected by multiple publishers before winning both the Carnegie Medal and Guardian Children's Fiction Prize for Children's Literature. Adams based the story on tales he told his daughters during a car trip, though he later stated he didn't originally intend it as a children's book. The novel includes graphic descriptions of rabbits being torn apart by dogs in extended violent sequences, rabbits caught in snares and slowly dying, in a totalitarian warren called Ephrata with a fascist military structure where female rabbits are forcibly controlled for breeding. The rabbits experience visions of the Black Rabbit of Inleth, a death figure, and witness apocalyptic destruction of their original warren. Adams invented the Lapine language for rabbit communication, adding depth but also intensity to the storytelling. The 1978 animated film adaptation traumatized a generation with its graphic violence, despite receiving a U rating for universal audiences in the UK. The book explores themes of authoritarianism, freedom versus security, and environmental destruction, remaining controversial as schools both use it for teaching complex themes and ban it for violence, representing the blurred line between children's and adult literature. The Little Match Girl. The Little Match Girl is a Danish fairy tale by Hans Christian Andersen, published in December 1845, originally titled Den lille pige med svavelstikkerne, telling the story of a poor child who freezes to death alone on New Year's Eve. In this approximately 1,500-word short story, a desperate girl is sent out by her father to sell matches in freezing weather and is too afraid to return home without money because he will beat her. As she sits freezing on the street, she lights matches one by one to warm herself, experiencing beautiful visions with each match: a warm stove, a roast goose, a decorated Christmas tree, and finally her deceased grandmother. Each time a match burns out, the harsh, cold reality returns worse than before. In her final vision, she sees her grandmother and begs her not to disappear, lighting all remaining matches at once. Her grandmother takes her to heaven, which represents the child's death from hypothermia. On New Year's morning, people find her frozen body on the street with scattered matches around her and a smile on her face, commenting that she wanted to warm herself, completely missing the tragedy of her suffering and death. The story was reportedly based on Andersen's own impoverished childhood when his mother sent him begging in the streets. Unlike most children's stories with rescue or redemption, this tale simply ends with a child dying alone while society ignores her, serving as Andersen's commentary on social neglect of poor children. If you want to see more, click the video on screen now.